The girl did not speak for 11 days after her mother died. Not to her father. Not to the grief counselor, who drove 40 minutes each way to sit with her in the sunroom twice a week. Not to the teachers who left notes on her desk with careful little drawings in the margins, thinking maybe art could reach where words could not. She sat in rooms full of people who loved her, and she was somewhere else entirely. Her name was Cora. She was 9 years old, and her father, Marcus Webb, no. Her father's name was not on any list that mattered, except the one the hospital had asked him to fill out. The night his wife stopped breathing. He was not Marcus Webb, he was not anyone from before. He was just the man who stood in his daughter's doorway at night, watching her breathe, grateful for that much at least. His name was Deshaun Okafor. He was 41 years old, the founder of a logistics software company that had been acquired 3 years earlier for $240 million. He had a house in Atlanta with more rooms than he could name, a personal chef he had let go after the funeral, because neither of them could stand the smell of food being prepared in that kitchen, and a daughter who had not said his name in 11 days. The grief counselor, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Ellison, told Deshaun that Cora's silence was protective. That children, especially girls who had been close to their mothers the way Cora had been, sometimes needed to disappear into themselves before they could find their way back. He used the word cocoon. Deshaun had nodded and said, "Thank you," and then sat in his car in his own driveway for 20 minutes before he could make himself go inside. He did not know what to do with a silent child. He had known, with some confidence, what to do with Cora when she was loud and certain and full of opinions about everything from which cereal was objectively the best, to why her third-grade teacher had unfairly assigned reading groups. He had known how to argue with her, how to tease her, how to make her laugh so hard she had to leave the table. He did not know how to reach into a silence that deep and find her. So he did what men like him often do when the problem is large enough. He hired someone. Her name was Theodora Vance. She was 52 years old, though she did not look it, and did not particularly care whether you thought so. She had grown up in Macon, Georgia, the fourth of 6 children, in a house where the roof leaked in 2 places, and supper was sometimes cornbread, and sometimes cornbread with butter, if the week had been good. She had put herself through a community college, then a 4-year program, then a graduate certificate in early childhood development, that she had completed at night while working days at an elementary school in southwest Atlanta. She had spent the last 20 years working with children who had experienced loss. Children from foster care. Children who had watched things no child should watch. Children who had gone quiet in exactly the way Cora had gone quiet. She had a waiting list 18 months long, and she did not take new clients often. She took Cora. She did not explain why to Deshaun, not in any way that satisfied him. She said only that she had read the intake notes, and she had some time, and she thought she might be useful. Deshaun had wanted more than that. A methodology, a timeline, something he could put in a spreadsheet and track. And Theodora had looked at him across his own kitchen table, with an expression that was not unkind, but was not accommodating either, and said, "Mr. Okafor, the most useful thing you can do right now is let me work." He did not like that. He hired her anyway. She came 3 mornings a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays. She arrived at 8:30, and she did not knock loudly. She let herself in through the side door that Deshaun had given her a key for, and she made herself tea in the kitchen. Always the same tea. A rooibos blend she brought from home in a small tin, and she sat at the kitchen island and waited. The first Tuesday, Cora did not come downstairs at all. The first Thursday, Cora came as far as the second-floor landing and sat there with her back against the wall, watching Theodora through the railing. Theodora did not call up to her. She did not wave. She sat with her tea and a book she had brought, a collection of illustrated folk tales, heavy, the kind you could feel the weight of, and she read, and occasionally she laughed quietly at something on the page. And that was all. The first Saturday, Cora came downstairs. She did not sit at the island. She stood at the far end of the kitchen, near the window that looked out over the back garden, and she watched Theodora with the particular wariness of a child who has learned that adults often want something from her that she does not know how to give. Theodora looked up, met her eyes, and said, "Good morning." Then she looked back at her book. Cora stayed for 40 minutes. Then she went back upstairs. Deshawn, who had positioned himself outside the kitchen door for most of that 40 minutes, went to his office and sat very still at his desk for a long time. He had not meant to watch her the way he did. That had not been the plan. The plan had been to trust the process, to give Theodora the space she had asked for, to be available to Cora at the edges without hovering at the center. Dr. Ellison had been clear about this. The worst thing a grieving parent could do was make the child feel responsible for managing the parent's grief. Deshawn knew this. He had written it on a notacard and taped it to the inside of his closet door, where he would see it every morning. But on the second Thursday, he found himself standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, listening. Not because he did not trust Theodora. He was not sure, in that moment, what he did or did not trust. He only knew that his daughter was in there, and that for the first time in 3 weeks, he could hear something other than silence. Cora was not speaking, but Theodora was. She was reading aloud, something low and unhurried. A story about a girl who crossed a wide river to find her grandmother on the other side, and about all the things the river tried to take from her along the way. Her voice had a particular quality, a steadiness that did not seem performed. It was the voice of someone who had said difficult things out loud for so long that she had made peace with all of them. Deshawn stood in the hallway and listened, and something in his chest that had been clenched since September began, very slightly, to unclench. The housekeeper had quit 2 weeks after the funeral. Respectfully, she had said, and Deshawn had understood. The house was not a good place to be those weeks. The personal assistant had gone on indefinite leave. The chef, as he had already said, was gone. The house was large and largely empty, and Deshawn had been managing the practical requirements of it, the groceries, the laundry, the endless small maintenance that a house that size demanded, in the distracted, haphazard way of a man whose mind was somewhere else. He needed someone to help with the house. That much was clear. The agency sent a man named Pruitt, who was 60 years old and had spent 30 years as a facilities manager at a hotel downtown, and who knew, with quiet competence, how to keep a large space running without being visible in it. He arrived on a Monday, reviewed the house methodically, made a list, and by the end of that first week, the kitchen was clean, in a way it had not been in months, and the back garden had been edged, and the soft furnishings that had needed cleaning since before the funeral had been taken and returned. Deshawn liked Pruitt. He was unobtrusive and reliable and did not ask personal questions. But it was not Pruitt that Deshawn found himself thinking about. It was the Tuesday of Theodora's 4th week. Deshawn had come downstairs earlier than usual, before Theodora arrived, intending to make coffee and be gone before she came. He had a meeting that he had rescheduled twice and could not reschedule again. He was in the kitchen, in an old sweatshirt and jeans, coffee going, when he heard the side door open and Theodora came in with her tin of rooibos and her heavy book and her unhurried walk, and she stopped when she saw him and said, "Mr. Okafor." And he said, without quite planning to, "Please don't call me that." She looked at him with the same expression she had used the first day, not unkind, not accommodating. "What would you like me to call you?" "Deshawn," she said at once, testing it. "Deshawn." Then she went to put the kettle on. He should have left then. He had a meeting. But he poured his coffee and stood at the island and watched her move through his kitchen with a familiarity that was not presumptuous, but was simply comfortable. The way someone moves through a space they have decided to treat with care. And he said, "Is it working? What you're doing with her?" Theodora did not answer immediately. She got her mug, the one Pruitt had apparently learned she used because it was already on the counter, and she said, "She sat with me for 2 hours on Saturday. I know, I was home, I know you were." A pause. She talked, not much, but some. Deshawn set down his coffee. "What did she say?" Theodora looked at him steadily. "I think that's between Cora and me for now." He had not liked that either. He had understood it. He left for his meeting without saying anything else, and he sat through 2 hours of a conversation about quarterly projections and said the correct things at the correct times and thought about his daughter, talking, tuned to a woman he had known for less than a month, and felt something that was not quite jealousy and not quite gratitude, but was somewhere in the complicated space between them. It was Pruitt who suggested it. Not directly. Pruitt was not a man who made direct suggestions about things that were not his business. But on a Wednesday, while Deshawn was working from home, Pruitt knocked on the office door and said that the back exterior needed a repaint before winter. And had he thought about bringing someone in? And there had been a brief conversation about the work involved. And Pruitt had said, almost as an aside, that if Deshawn wanted to be around the house more without disrupting Theodora's sessions, he might consider taking up some of the outdoor maintenance himself. Gave a man something to do with his hands. Deshawn had looked at him for a long moment. Pruitt's expression was completely neutral. You think I'm hovering, Deshawn said. I think Cora has started going outside on Saturday afternoons, Pruitt said, and the garden could use someone on it. That was how Deshawn Okafor, who had not done physical outdoor labor since the summer he was 17, and worked for a landscaping crew to save money for school, found himself in the back garden on a Saturday afternoon in a pair of old work gloves, pulling up dead growth from around the flower beds his wife had planted, when Cora and Theodora came outside. He had his back to them. He heard the screen door open, heard their footsteps on the stone path, heard Cora's voice, which was coming back now, unsteadily, the way a limb comes back after it has gone to sleep, say something he could not make out. He did not turn around. He kept working. He heard Theodora say, "That's the salvia. It'll come back in the spring. The root structure is still good." A pause. Then Cora, a little louder, "How do you know?" "You look at the stems, down close to the ground. See how they're still a little green? That's alive. That means it'll come back." Silence. Then the sound of footsteps on gravel, moving closer to the flower bed. Deshawn did not look up. He moved slightly to the left, making room. Cora crouched down beside him. She did not say anything. She looked at the stems the way Theodora had told her to, leaning in close, her small face very serious. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at her father's gloved hands, working in the dirt. "Those are Mom's flowers," she said. Deshawn's hands stopped. "Yeah," he said. "They are." Cora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you going to keep them?" "If they'll come back," he said. "Theodora says they will." Cora looked over her shoulder at Theodora, who was standing a few feet back on the path, not approaching, just present. Then she looked back at the flower bed. "Okay," she said. She picked up a small hand trowel that had been lying in the grass. "I'll help." Deshawn Okafor did not cry. He was very careful about that. He turned back to the soil and kept his face even and kept his hands moving, and the three of them worked in the garden for an hour without saying much, and the afternoon light moved through the trees the way it does in October, low and gold, and already a little mournful, and it was the best hour he had had in 4 months. He started noticing things he had not meant to notice. The way Theodora talked to Cora. Not down, not around, but straight at her, as if Cora were simply a person worth talking to, and not a fragile thing that needed to be handled carefully. The way she laughed when Cora said something funny, a real laugh. Not the careful, encouraging laugh of someone performing delight for a child's benefit. The way she sometimes said nothing at all, and let Cora fill the silence with whatever was in her, and how Cora, given enough space, always eventually filled it. He noticed the way she moved through the house, with purpose but without urgency. The way she was never startled, never rattled, never visibly tired by the work, even when he imagined it must be exhausting. He noticed that she drank her rooibos tea in the morning, and plain water in the afternoon, and never ate anything in the house, which he thought about more than he should have. He noticed, on a Tuesday in November, that she had paint on her left wrist, a small streak of cadmium yellow, and when he mentioned it she said, without any self-consciousness, "I was up late. I paint sometimes." "What do you paint?" "Whatever's in my head." He had wanted to ask more. He had not asked more. But he thought about it, that night, and the night after, and the particular way she had said, "Whatever's in my head," as if what was in her head was a place she had learned to be comfortable in, and he was not sure he had ever known anyone who could say that with so little performance. Cora started talking about her mother in December. Not all at once, not in a flood. In small pieces, the way a child gives away a secret, a sentence here, a detail there, always watching to see how it was received before she gave more. She told Theodora about the way her mother had smelled. A specific perfume she had worn, cedar and orange, that Cora had found in the bathroom and moved to her nightstand because she was afraid the smell would fade. She told her about the game they had played on long drives, where you had to name everything you could see that was one color without repeating anything. She told her, on a Saturday afternoon in December, with snow beginning outside the window, about the last normal day they had had together, the week before the diagnoses, when they had gone to the farmer's market and her mother had bought strawberries, even though they were out of season and not very good because Cora had asked her to, and they had eaten them in the car on the way home. Deshaun was not in the room. He was at the top of the stairs. He had not planned to be there. He had been coming down to get something from the kitchen, had heard Cora's voice, and had stopped. He could not have moved even if he had wanted to. He sat down on the top step and he listened to his daughter. Describe a day he had not known. She was holding in her body that carefully, and he pressed his back against the wall and looked at the ceiling of his own house. And the grief came up through him in a way it had not been able to when he was the one who needed to be strong. Theodora's voice below said, "She sounds like someone who paid attention to the things that mattered." Cora said, "She always knew what I wanted before I said it. Some people are built that way. It's a kind of love, noticing." Cora was quiet. Then she said, "Do you think she still knows?" Theodora did not answer right away. Deshaun held very still. "I think," Theodora said carefully, "that the people who loved us that well don't just stop. That kind of paying attention, it goes somewhere. I don't know exactly where, but I don't think it stops." There was a long silence. Then Cora said, in a voice very different from the voice she usually used, smaller and more certain at once, "I think she knows you're nice." Deshaun put his hand over his mouth. "Below," Theodora said, in a voice that was not quite steady, "That's about the kindest thing anyone said to me in a long time." He told himself, for several weeks, that what he was feeling was gratitude. It was reasonable to feel gratitude. Theodora had given his daughter back to him, piece by piece. Not completely, not quickly, but genuinely. Cora laughed now. She had gone back to school in January and come home with homework complaints, which Dr. Ellison said was an excellent sign. She had started asking Deshaun about the garden, whether the salvia had started coming back yet, checking it every few days, with the seriousness of someone monitoring an important project. He told himself it was gratitude, and he mostly believed it until the Thursday in February when Theodora arrived and her coat was soaked through because it had been raining since the night before. And he said, without thinking, "You should have called. I would have picked you up." And she looked at him with something that was not quite surprise but was close to it. And he heard what he had just said and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the warmth rise in his face. "I have a car," she said. "I know," he said. "I know, I just—" He stopped. There was no way to finish that sentence that did not mean exactly what it meant. He handed her a towel for her coat and went back to his office and sat down and stared at his screen. She was 52 years old. He was 41. She was here for Cora, which was the thing that mattered, the only thing that was supposed to matter. She was a professional in a professional context, and he was the client, and his wife had died 14 months ago, and he was not a person who was supposed to be feeling what he was feeling. He felt it anyway. He had not been given a choice about that. He said nothing. He said nothing for 6 more weeks. He was careful. He was scrupulous about the professional distance he had apparently decided to maintain, while also standing in the garden with her on Saturday afternoons, talking about the salvia, which had indeed come back, and about the things she painted on late nights, and about what it had been like to grow up in Macon. The fourth of 6 children in a house where the roof leaked and supper was sometimes just cornbread. She had told him that on a Saturday in March, while they were both looking at the first green shoots coming up from the earth. And he had told her about the summer he was 17 and worked landscaping, and how he had sworn he would never be poor again, and how it had taken him 20 years to understand that what he had really been afraid of was not being poor, but being powerless, and how he still was not entirely sure he had resolved that. She had looked at him when he said that, not with the clinical attention of someone cataloging information, but with the look of someone who had recognized something. "You're not powerless now," she said. "Not most of the time," he said. "When Cora was quiet, I was." She nodded slowly. "That's the thing about loving children. They find every place in you that isn't as solid as you thought." He looked at her. "Is that what you went into this work for?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the shoots coming up in his wife's flower bed. "No," she said. "I went into it because I was one of those children. Someone found me when I was about Cora's age. I spent the next 40 years trying to be that for someone else." He did not know what to say to that. He looked at her profile, her reading glasses, pushed up on her head, a streak of dirt on her forearm where she had been helping him with the bed, gray coming in at her temples that she made no effort to conceal. And he thought that she was one of the most honest people he had ever met, and that honesty, in his experience, was rarer than wealth and harder to earn. He asked her to dinner on a Saturday in April. He had not planned it carefully. He had planned it very carefully, and then abandoned the plan 3 separate times, and then said it unexpectedly, which was not a thing he was known for. He was a man who was known for precision. He had built a company on systems and logistics, on the idea that outcomes could be anticipated and prepared for, and he stood in his back garden in the late afternoon light and said, "Theodora, I'd like to take you to dinner." She turned and looked at him. He could not fully read her expression. "Cora's sessions end next month," he said. "Dr. Ellison thinks she's ready. I think she's ready." He paused. "I'm not asking because of the sessions." "I know," she said. "I know you're not, but I want to say it out loud anyway." She was quiet for a moment. A bird was singing somewhere in the trees behind the fence, the same 4 notes repeating. The salvia was fully up now, coming in purple and healthy, exactly the way she had told Cora it would. "You know I'm 11 years older than you," she said. "I know, and I'm not. I don't do this. I don't make a habit of this. I know that too." She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the garden, at the flowers his wife had planted that had come back because the roots were still good, and she was quiet in the particular way she had of being quiet, which was not absence but presence, a fullness, rather than an emptiness. "Where would you take me?" she said finally. He had thought about this. He said the name of a restaurant in Midtown that he had looked up 3 weeks ago, and then been embarrassed to have looked up. A small place that had been written about for its quiet and its food, and the way the light came through the windows in the evenings. She said, "I've wanted to go there," he said. "Saturday," she said. "Not this Saturday." She looked at him. "Next Saturday." He nodded. He didn't say more than that. He turned back to the garden, and she turned back to the garden, and they stood there in the late April light, the warm coming up from the earth as it did at that time of year, the whole thing still ahead of them, and fragile and real, and somewhere inside the house. Cora was doing homework at the kitchen table, and the roof was not leaking anywhere, and the flowers were all coming back. He had not expected this. He had not expected any of it. Not the silence, not the long, slow unsilencing, not the woman who had walked into his kitchen with a tin of rooibos tea, and the patience of someone who had spent her whole life learning how to wait for the right things. He had not expected to stand in a garden in April and feel, against all reasonable expectation, that the ground under him was solid. He thought about what she had said that day in March. "The people who loved us that well don't just stop." He thought about his wife, who had known what Cora wanted before she said it, who had planted flowers she had not been alive to see come back. He thought about the kind of love that pays attention. He thought Theodora was right. He thought it went somewhere. He thought it had gone here. The bird in the trees sang its four notes again, and the evening settled in around them like something familiar, and he breathed it in and stayed.